welcome to episode 13. Information requires context. So before we delve into the personal counts I'm going to share with you today, because this is not theory and curriculum, this is people's lives, let's quickly explore the theory that protects the lies that devastate lives. The 1867 Project. Now, I haven't told you to read any books yet. I'm going to start to do that because we need to. No one should graduate from high school without reading this book. Unfortunately, far too many are graduating without the reading skill level required to do so. And that is tragic. A quick excerpt. Critical social justice. They teach this in schools. How is it connected to gender and sexuality and everything? Well, critical social justice declares that people are not unique individuals, but members of identity groups. Race, gender, sexuality, disability, and the relationships between those groups are defined by power, privilege, and oppression. So you are either a victim or a perpetrator. Now, if you picture a pyramid, at the top is a straight, white, able-bodied, middle-class male, and you are therefore automatically, regardless of your age, of what you've said or done, you are a privileged perpetrator and you are an oppressor. Now, a disabled, lesbian, transgendered, indigenous woman would be automatically, as someone has decreed, be on the bottom. They are an oppressed victim. Now, the objective of social justice warriors and consequently school curriculum is to flip this nonsensical pyramid theory upside down. So if you are transgender or anything, you are at the top and you should now have the most privilege because you have been oppressed, and at the bottom should be whoever they deem to be the oppressors. Now, it identifies everyone by intersectionality. So how many traits overlap is the more oppressed or the more of an oppressor that you are. But what it fails to address is reality. So we are teaching students absolute nonsense. Let me explain it. So everyone has a different combination, numerous characteristics, cultural influences, family backgrounds, personalities, wealth, education, faith, and beliefs. Now, intersectionality is true. So it should short circuit this whole enterprise, but they ignore the reality of it. So are you ready? This is from the book. We are going to make a fictional woman to explain it. Imagine a disabled lesbian woman who's part Irish, Mayan, and South African. Is she white? Is she black? Oh dear, we don't know. She's a Rhodes Scholar. So it's hard to be a victim when you're a Rhodes Scholar, but she is. And she's a specialist in Dutch art. She comes from a wealthy family with a reserved father and an alcoholic mother. She was homeschooled. Well, I think that category goes above white males for the weirdos. She's slightly above average in height, but she's short. I said that wrong. She's slightly short-sighted. She has above average looks and below average height. She suffers from eczema, is a Roman Catholic, and speaks English and German. So we could go on for hours determining the complexities of her life, her fake life. But her traits, although they will be shared with innumerable people, no one will exactly mirror her. So the logical conclusion of intersectionality is that she is the only person in her group. She is unique. We all are. So identity groups are non-existent. Now, social justice warriors profess to protect minorities, but in order to do so, they obliterate our uniqueness as human beings because the smallest minority group is the individual. So there are therefore no minority groups. But this is what we hear. All of these people are oppressors. All of these people are victims. It's ridiculous. But we've dumbed down education so much that critical thinking has disappeared, and any student that tries to voice otherwise is labeled and punished. They are bullied. So here is where social justice theory blows up in the real world, and it does. They've labeled certain groups as victims, and they've written in stone that they will always be victims. Well, that's certainly a factor in someone feeling depressed and powerless. How's that for your mental health? Coming from the school, we want to make sure that you stay depressed. The sting for the social justice enclave is that their victims are not all behaving like victims. In fact, some are behaving like bullies, and it is coming out all over social media. Now, not all, because remember, everybody's an individual. So I know of an individual that began as an adult, sex reassignment surgery. But if you asked me with my limited interaction to describe her, I would say she's kind and respectful. Now, at the same time, there are adults who are living vicariously through their children, and they're intentionally choosing to raise their children from birth as the opposite biological sex that they were born. That's evil. That actually is happening in Saskatchewan. It's actually happening all over Canada, but very close to home. Then there are groomers who work hard to alter children's identities, both physically and sexually, because it makes them easier to traffic. Autistic children are particularly vulnerable because they're so easily moldable. So groomers are also evil. Our naivety has got to go. Stop saying that they're helping kids. So we have individuals, we have within the trans community some kind, respectful people. I'm sure there's more than one. And then there are those in the trans community that are exceedingly violent and angry. They hurl objects, insults, and they spit on detransitioners. They're bullies. Now, I feel compassion before you start to judge me, and because anger, they're angry. But anger is always the second emotion. It flows out of fear. When you lose your kids in the mall, parents are exceedingly fearful when they find their kids. It's like, don't ever do that again. Anger comes out. It's the second emotion. Frustration, when we try to solve something and we can't. Ugh. Ooh, we're not angry, we're frustrated. When we're hurt, you hit your finger with the hammer. Special words come out of our mouths. We sound angry, but we're hurt. Depression? Oh, depression. Anger, underneath a lot of anger is depression and rejection. Now, it's quite common knowledge. People may try to criticize it, like you're not a psychologist. Every parent should know this. Every person on the earth, if you actually stop to process, you don't need a degree in psychology to figure that out. Now, when you factor in the trauma from all forms of abuse, physical, sexual, and emotional, their actions are understandable. Because if you go back and look, and we're going to take a look at that today, it's the trauma that causes the dysphoria. But nonetheless, those actions are unacceptable, even if we understand why. Now, one of the ironic statements in the Deepening the Discussion document is that trans kids encounter difficulty in entering the workforce. So we have to help them because they're being bullied and picked on and they're having a hard time finding jobs. But this curriculum actually sets them up to fail. So rather than having access to healing and therapy, they're trained to carry the persona of a victim, and they're taught to demand their rights to their own reality, their own grammar, and their own definitions. So if you go to a job interview and you yell, "You misgendered me," there are actually, I've heard 72 genders. We're supposed to remember them all. Really. My pronouns are zippity-doo-dah. And it's ziz, zuz, whatever. It's impossible to remember because it's not real. And we have lived our whole lives with he and she. So employers don't want to get yelled at. They don't want to be threatened with or experience litigation. They just want to feed their families. So hiring victims or bullies makes that extremely challenging. So don't paint everyone with the same brush. That's not fair. Exactly. The concept of identity groups is destructive, not protective. Now, slide back. There was a little bunny trail, but going back to intersectionality and victims and bullies, 3 years ago, you couldn't access a detransitioner story on social media if you tried. they are now much, much more easy to find. And I'm going to leave you a few names so that you can go looking. And I'm leaving a few things in the comments. Whoever insists on pushing trans ideology without ever listening to a single detransitioner story, without becoming aware of the side effects of puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy, and without examining the negative outcomes of transitioning and the PTSD that follows, are cowards. They are intellectually arrogant, and they are void of compassion. In North America, governments that are still pushing for this, even though other countries are backing off, they will pay for transition surgeries, but they will not pay for detransitioning surgeries. So we get you to this place of trauma and physical devastation, and then we just leave you there. You have to cover the cost on your own. I want to talk about Walt Heyer. Walt as in Walter, Heyer, H-E-Y-E-R. Not sure if I'm saying it right. He was 43, and it was, I think, 1981 when he underwent sex assignment surgery. He detransitioned 8 years later. And he and a doctor started a group called sexchangeregret.com 17 years ago. Now, he has, by himself with his doctor, helped over 4,000 people. And you might say, well, that's not a very large number compared to how many people that they say have transitioned. And if you look it up and you spread it over the population, that would mean in my small community that there are 40 trans people, and there are not. So the statistics are... So he said, it might seem like I haven't helped a lot of people, but if you go onto Reddit, r/dtrans, one Reddit site, r/dtrans, there's 60,000 people on that have reached out on that site. Now, the earliest that anyone reached out to Walt was 3 weeks post-surgery, saying, this is a mistake, I'm devastated. Now, the longest, from when they had their surgery to when they reached out, this was a 73-year-old man, and he reached out, he said, I've struggled since I was 14, can you help me? And I mean, Walt's very black and white with him. He said, you got to stop seeing your gender therapist. You've been paying him $250 a week for like 30 years, and you're reaching out to me because nothing has helped, and you're not okay with this. So he said, tell her I said you need to see a trauma therapist. You have to take the ACEs childhood trauma test, ACES, and get trauma therapy. He said to him, don't wear your red pumps and a skirt, go in dressed as what you are, a man. So his gender therapist said, oh, I'm also a trauma therapist, but not once did she think to evaluate him for trauma. 2 hours later, he walked out, and he messaged Walt Heyer, and he said, I'm free. The question that Walt asks people is, what happened before you hated yourself? What happened before you hated your body? What happened that made you hate how you're made? Now, not all, certainly not all, by no means will all trauma be resolved in a 2-hour session. That is the exception, but it can be resolved. But the tragedies of transitioning and subsequent PTSD and challenges of trying to detransition to the degree that it's even physically possible could all be avoided if we treated trauma, except in Canada, where you are not allowed, and you will lose your license or go to jail if you try. So Walt, this is where I'm getting with the victims and bullies. I just wanted to give you a picture of what he was like. He was going to speak at a function, and on the way into the building, I watched this, it was a video, he was accosted by a crowd of trans-identifying people. They yelled, cursed, spit on him, threw garbage on him as he walked by, and he is 83 years old. The violent disrespect was mind-boggling. So who's the victim? Who are the bullies? Now, both Walt's doctor who performed the surgery and the psychologist who approved his surgery, when he filed his affidavit to be reinstated as a male in America, said, you didn't change your gender. Your internal morphology is male. So Walt says we can identify as changed gender, but no one in the history of the world has ever actually changed their gender. It's all cosmetic. Second person I want to quickly talk about, her name's Chloe Cole. She's young. Her mom said no the first time she was being pushed into transitioning. And then about 2 years later, she was young. About 2 years later, her mom caved into the suicide line and at the second attempt. And so she had surgery at 14, a total top removal. By 18, it's like, what have I done? Now, the victim and the bullies here, she was speaking on a university campus. They paid to have a booth. They have them all the time. It's a very American thing to do. And a man, pretending to be a woman, dumped 3 liters of tomato juice all over her booth. Somebody's MacBook got destroyed. Told her, you have no right to be here. And she said, yes, I do. I paid for the booth. And she said, you actually have no right to be throwing stuff at us. And then he stomped off. Anger. It was, I'm leaving it in the comments. It's a sad video. Chloe and another detransitioner were going to speak at a conference sponsored by the American Medical Association, and then they canceled them. We do not want to hear from a detransitioner. Your voice doesn't matter. We have post-surgery evaluations for everything, but not for this. And doctors in America are beginning to be sued. There's one more video. Hopefully it will show up. I'm not going to share it. It's something that you should watch. Her name is Clementine, and her life has been devastated. Now, some other names that you might want to listen to. Dr. Ann E. Gillies, Gillies. Dr. Miriam Grossman, Grossman. Probably most of you have heard of Dr. Jordan Peterson. We need to start listening to trained psychologists who know what they're talking about, who are fighting. We need to stop believing the lies of the Medical Association, because here's another doctor's name, Dr. Johanna Kennedy, a prominent doctor and trans rights activist. She admitted she publicly withheld publication of a $10 million taxpayer-funded study on the effects of puberty blockers on American children, who are no different than Canadian children, after finding no evidence, zero, that they improve patients' health. But, oh, they do damage to the body. So a major researcher and medical doctor, there are great doctors, just like there's great teachers. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But she found evidence that we shouldn't use puberty blockers, and she was so stressed she withheld it because she was worried it would lead people to believe we shouldn't use puberty blockers. So actually, they are the victims, aren't they? When a vocal part of our society wants children neutered instead of well and healed of trauma, we can no longer remain silent. To not say no is to say yes. And the real bullies win. See you soon.